Cops wrongfully arrested a black woman, thinking they could get away with it. But when she called her husband, the U.S. Attorney General, their careers were destroyed in the most satisfying way. This is the story that will leave you cheering for justice. The glow of streetlights casts long shadows as Marissa Johnson drives through the quiet streets of Oakwood Heights. Her dashboard clock reads 11:42 p.m. Eleanor's eyes are tired, but there's a quiet satisfaction in them. At 45, her face shows both the warmth of someone who cares deeply and the determination of someone who has fought hard battles. Eleanor adjusts the rearview mirror, catching a glimpse of the community center pamphlets scattered across her back seat. "Know Your Rights," reads one bold headline. After 6 hours of helping teenagers understand how to navigate encounters with authority, her throat is dry, but her purpose is renewed. "Just 3 more blocks," she whispers to herself, thinking of the hot tea waiting at home. Red and blue lights suddenly flash behind her. Eleanor checks her speed, 5 under the limit. She signals and pulls over carefully, the way she's taught countless young people to do. As she reaches for her license, she takes a deep breath, pushing away the familiar knot of tension in her stomach. 2 officers approach, flashlights aimed directly at her eyes. Officer Daniels, a stocky man with a military-style haircut, stands by her window while Officer Reynolds circles to the passenger side. "License and registration," Daniels demands, without offering a reason for the stop. Eleanor keeps her movements slow and deliberate as she hands over her documents. "May I ask why I'm being pulled over, officer?" Officer Daniels ignores her question, shining his light into her back seat. The beam catches the pamphlets. "What's all this?" "Educational materials from the community center where I volunteer," Eleanor explains calmly. "I teach young people about civic engagement and constitutional rights." Something shifts in Daniel's expression. His jaw tightens. "Step out of the vehicle, please." "May I ask why?" "I haven't done anything wrong. We've had reports of suspicious activity in this neighborhood. You match a description." The absurdity of this statement hangs in the air. Eleanor lives just 3 blocks away in this predominantly white neighborhood. She's the only black female law professor at the prestigious university 5 miles down the road. "Officer, I live on Maple Street, just around the corner. My ID shows my address." Daniels studies her license with exaggerated scrutiny. "This doesn't look right to me, could be fake." Eleanor's heart pounds, but her voice remains steady. "I assure you, it's valid. You can verify my information." Officer Reynolds points at the community center materials. "What are you really doing with those? Stirring up trouble?" As the tension escalates, Eleanor reaches slowly for her phone on the seat beside her. "I'd like to call someone who can verify my identity." "She's reaching," Daniels shouts, his hand moving to his holster. Before Eleanor can explain, both officers pull her from the car. The phone clatters to the pavement. Eleanor winces as her wrists are roughly cuffed behind her back. "You're under arrest for resisting an officer and suspicious behavior," Daniels announces, the satisfaction in his voice unmistakable. "This is a mistake," Eleanor states firmly, even as she's guided toward the patrol car. "I have the right to make a phone call." Officer Reynolds laughs. "Sure, Professor, you'll get your call downtown." As they place her in the back seat, Daniels adds with a smirk, "Who you gonna call anyway? Some community troublemaker?" Eleanor meets his gaze with quiet confidence. "I simply need to call my husband." The officers exchange amused glances, completely unaware that in a matter of hours, this routine harassment will trigger consequences that will transform their department forever. Who will Eleanor call? And how will that single phone call change everything that happens next? The fluorescent lights of the 5th Precinct cast harsh shadows across Eleanor's face as she stands at the booking desk. The clock on the wall reads 12:37 a.m. Her professional blazer and modest jewelry stand in stark contrast to how she's being treated. like someone who doesn't deserve basic respect. The booking officer, a heavy-set man with a permanently bored expression, barely looks at her as he takes her fingerprints. He presses her fingers against the scanner with unnecessary force. Resisting arrest, huh? You people always think you know better than the officers doing their jobs. Eleanor says nothing, but her thoughts flow clearly in her voiceover. You people. Two small words that carry the weight of centuries. I've heard them in courtrooms, at faculty meetings, and now here, where they might do the most damage. As Eleanor is photographed for her mugshot, her mind drifts back to her childhood in Chicago, 1985. A younger Eleanor sits in her grandfather's modest living room. William Johnson, at 70, still carries himself with the dignity of the civil rights attorney he once was. His hands, now gnarled with arthritis, rest on a worn legal book. My grandfather lived through times when standing up meant risking everything. He represented protesters who were beaten for sitting at lunch counters. He taught me something I never forgot. In the memory, her grandfather's voice is gentle but firm. Knowledge is your armor, Ellie. Dignity is your sword. They can take your freedom for a moment, but never your worth. Back in the present, Eleanor is led to a holding cell. As she walks down the corridor, she notices Sergeant Miller, a veteran officer in his late 50s with graying temples. He watches the booking process with visible discomfort, checking his watch repeatedly. When Officer Daniels recounts the arrest with embellishments about Eleanor's attitude, Miller's eyes dart away, unwilling to challenge the narrative but clearly troubled by it. I recognize that look, the discomfort of good people who stay silent. Sometimes they're more dangerous than those who actively cause harm. At the cell, Officer Harris, a younger woman with tired eyes, processes Eleanor with a professional efficiency that borders on kindness. She offers a clipboard without the contempt shown by her colleagues. Sign here acknowledging your personal items have been stored, Harris says, her voice lowered slightly as she adds, the phone system is backed up tonight. Might be an hour before you can make your call. Eleanor nods in acknowledgement of this small act of humanity. The holding cell contains 6 other people, 5 of them black or Hispanic. Eleanor sits on a metal bench, her back straight despite her exhaustion. Across from her, a young black man with a split lip sits hunched over. Next to him, an elderly Hispanic woman clutches a plastic bag of medications that should have been processed at intake. I'm seeing the same story play out that I've documented for years. Victor, arrested for suspicious loitering outside his own apartment building. Maria, picked up for causing a disturbance when she simply couldn't understand the officer's rapid English. Different details, same narrative. Eleanor begins a silent catalogue of the procedural violations she's witnessing. Miranda rights given incompletely or not at all, medical needs ignored, phone calls delayed beyond legal limits. Each mental note strengthens her resolve. 2 hours pass before Officer Daniels appears at the cell door, smirking. Professor Johnson, ready for your phone call now. As Eleanor stands, she asks quietly, Officer Daniels, are you familiar with the Justice Department's new directives on procedural conduct for detainees? Specifically, Section 4.3 regarding timely processing and communication rights. His smirk falters for just a moment before returning with greater force. Save the legal mumbo-jumbo. You get your 5 minutes on the phone like everyone else. As they walk to the phone, Eleanor feels something she rarely allows herself to feel. The burning humiliation of being judged solely by her skin color. For a brief moment, her carefully maintained composure cracks. 20 years of education, a law degree from Harvard, published works on constitutional law, guest lecturer at international conferences, and still, in this moment, I am nothing but a color to them. My grandfather warned me this would happen, no matter how high I climbed. Eleanor straightens her shoulders, drawing strength from statistics she knows all too well. Black drivers are 20% more likely to be pulled over than white drivers. Once stopped, they are twice as likely to be searched. Black Americans are 3 times more likely to be arrested for identical behaviors. These aren't just numbers in my research papers anymore. They're my reality tonight. At the phone, Eleanor stands tall despite her fatigue. Officers Daniels and Reynolds hover nearby, making no pretense of giving her privacy. $10, says she's calling some community organizer who'll show up with protesters, Reynolds jokes. Nah, probably some ambulance-chasing lawyer who'll give us a lecture about her rights. Daniels responds with exaggerated boredom. Eleanor dials the number with steady fingers, ignoring their taunts. When the call connects, she speaks quietly, but with perfect clarity, each word carefully chosen. Michael, it's Eleanor. I'm at the 5th precinct. I've been arrested without cause while driving home from the center. Officers Daniels and Reynolds claimed my ID was suspicious and arrested me for resisting when I reached for my phone. I've been held for over 2 hours without proper processing. There are 6 others here experiencing similar treatment. She pauses, listening to the response on the other end of the line. The calm in her voice masks the storm of emotions beneath. Yes, I understand. I love you too. As Eleanor hangs up, Officer Daniels laughs. That's it? No demands to be released? No threats about knowing important people? Eleanor simply returns to her seat in the holding cell, her expression unreadable. They have no idea who I just called, or what's about to happen. But this isn't about vengeance. It's about justice, not just for me, but for everyone in this cell tonight, and everyone who will come after us. Have you ever been judged unfairly based on appearance alone? What happened, and how did it make you feel? Eleanor's phone call to Michael Johnson begins a chain of events that ripples through the precinct with gathering force. What the officers don't know is that Michael isn't just any concerned husband. He's the recently appointed U.S. Attorney General, confirmed just 3 months ago. In their Georgetown home, Michael Johnson sits up in bed, instantly alert despite the late hour. At 48, he carries the weight of his office with a quiet intensity. The bedside lamp casts a warm glow across family photos, Michael and Eleanor at her law school graduation, at his confirmation ceremony, with their teenage son at his piano recital. Michael's voice is controlled but urgent as he speaks to his chief of staff, then to the head of the Civil Rights Division. By 1:17 a.m., the machinery of federal justice begins to move with surprising speed. At the precinct, Officer Daniels returns to his desk, still chuckling about Eleanor's phone call. Lady thinks she's so important with her fancy words, he tells Reynolds, who laughs in response. 27 minutes after Eleanor's call, the precinct phone rings. The desk sergeant answers, his expression shifting from boredom to confusion to alarm. He transfers the call to Lieutenant Parker, who listens with growing concern before hurrying to find the precinct captain. Power has its own language, Eleanor's voiceover reflects, as she observes the sudden flurry of activity. I can read it in their movements, the quickened steps, the straightened postures, the sideways glances. Officers who had been lounging at their desks suddenly appear busy. Sergeant Miller, who had been silently troubled earlier, now moves with purpose, checking paperwork with newfound attention to detail. At 2:04 a.m., Captain Brooks, a man who rarely appears in the precinct at this hour, strides through the doors. His tailored uniform and rigid posture speak of someone unaccustomed to being caught off guard. His eyes scan the room until they find Eleanor in her cell. "Uncuff Ms. Johnson immediately and bring her to my office," he orders, his voice clipped. Officer Daniels stammers, "Sir, she was resisting arrest and—" "Now, officer," Captain Brooks cuts him off. As her handcuffs are removed, Eleanor notices the other detainees watching. Their eyes hold questions, and a glimmer of hope that whatever is happening might somehow help them too. The young man with the split lip straightens slightly. The elderly woman clutches her medications tighter. Their faces remind me why this moment matters beyond my own comfort. This isn't about me getting special treatment. It's about exposing a system that should work equally for everyone, but doesn't. Eleanor could walk out immediately, but instead, she deliberately takes her time. She asks Officer Harris for a notepad, writing down the names and situation of each person in the cell. Harris, sensing the shifting dynamics, provides the information without resistance. In Captain Brooks' office, the tension is thick enough to touch. Brooks stands behind his desk, his expression a careful mask. "Mrs. Johnson," he begins. "Professor Johnson," Eleanor corrects him quietly. "Professor Johnson," he continues, "there appears to have been a misunderstanding tonight. Your husband has expressed concerns about your detention." Eleanor studies him for a moment before responding. There is no triumph in her voice, no gloating, only the precise, measured tone of someone who has prepared for this moment throughout her career. "Captain Brooks, this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a demonstration of systemic failures in your precinct." She places her notepad on his desk, open to the page where she's documented every violation she's witnessed since her arrest. "Your officers failed to provide proper Miranda warnings to 3 detainees. The elderly woman in cell 2 has been denied access to prescribed medication for over 4 hours. The young man with the facial injury hasn't received medical attention. Phone calls have been delayed beyond legal limits, and those are just the violations I personally witnessed in a 2-hour window." Captain Brooks's expression tightens. "I can assure you this isn't typical of our procedures. With respect, Captain, my research suggests otherwise. The patterns I've observed tonight align precisely with the statistical evidence of disparate treatment documented in this precinct over the past 5 years. The captain's composure slips for just a moment. "What exactly are you looking for here, Professor Johnson? An apology? Disciplinary action against specific officers?" Eleanor leans forward slightly, her voice lowering to ensure this conversation remains between them. This isn't about public humiliation. It's about effective change. "I'm looking for accountability and reform, Captain, not just because of what happened to me, but because of what happens every day to people without my connections. I have the direct ear of the U.S. Attorney General, not just as his wife, but as a respected legal scholar. We can approach this as adversaries, or as partners in necessary change." As they continue their tense discussion, Eleanor's voiceover reveals the complex emotions beneath her composed exterior. Part of me feels relief that this ordeal is ending for me. Another part feels guilty that I have an escape route while others remain behind. But the strongest part, the part my grandfather nurtured, feels determined. This moment isn't about vengeance. It's about leveraging this incident to create lasting change. Personal vindication means nothing if the system remains broken for everyone else. The precinct clock reads 2:47 a.m. when Eleanor finally emerges from the captain's office. The atmosphere has transformed completely. Officers avoid her gaze. Paperwork is being processed with unusual efficiency. The others who were detained are now receiving proper attention. As Eleanor collects her belongings, Officer Harris approaches her. "Your husband is waiting outside, Professor Johnson." Eleanor nods in acknowledgement, but then asks, "And the others who were detained with me?" "Their cases are being reviewed immediately," Harris responds, her voice betraying a newfound respect. As Eleanor walks toward the exit, she passes Officer Daniels, who stands rigid and pale by his desk. Their eyes meet briefly. Eleanor doesn't speak. She doesn't have to. Her very presence now represents a reckoning that extends far beyond this single night. What would you say if you were in Eleanor's position during that private conversation with Captain Brooks? Outside the precinct, Michael Johnson waits by his car, tension visible in every line of his body. When Eleanor emerges through the glass doors, their eyes meet across the parking lot. He steps forward, but respects her enough not to rush to her side as though she were fragile. Eleanor walks with measured steps, her dignity intact despite the night's events. When she reaches him, their embrace speaks volumes: relief, love, shared understanding of what this moment means both personally and professionally. "The others inside," Eleanor says as they separate. "They need the same attention I received." Michael nods, understanding immediately. This isn't over, not by a long shot. In the car, Eleanor declines to go straight home. "I need to document everything while it's fresh. Drive around the block a few times." As streetlights slide across her face, Eleanor records voice notes, detailed, precise observations of every procedural violation, every biased comment, every moment that exemplifies the broken system she experienced firsthand. What happened tonight wasn't exceptional. That's what makes it so important. It wasn't a few bad apples having a bad night. It was business as usual, until they discovered who I was married to. The question now is how to use this moment to create change for those who don't have an Attorney General's direct line. At home, the kitchen light glows warm as Eleanor and Michael sit at their table, still in the clothes they wore during the crisis. 2 mugs of tea steam between them. Their conversation moves between personal and professional realms, with the ease of 2 people who have spent years bridging those worlds. "I've never been so angry," Michael admits, his hands clasped tightly. "As your husband, I wanted to rain down every possible consequence. As Attorney General ... You have a broader responsibility," Eleanor finishes his thought. "We need to be strategic about this," she continues. "If it becomes about us, the Attorney General's wife being mistreated, we lose the bigger opportunity. This has to be about the system, not about me." Michael nods, already shifting into the methodical legal mind that earned him his position. A targeted departmental review, not just of tonight but patterns over time. "And I'll document my experience as part of my ongoing research," Eleanor adds, not as a victim seeking sympathy, but as a legal scholar presenting evidence of a broader pattern. As dawn breaks, they have outlined a plan that uses their unique positions not for revenge, but for reform. 4 weeks later, Eleanor stands before a group of young people at the community center. The room is packed. Word has spread about what happened to her. On the walls hang posters outlining constitutional rights in clear, accessible language. "Knowledge is your first line of defense," Eleanor tells them, echoing her grandfather's words. "But how you use that knowledge matters just as much." She doesn't speak of her arrest with anger or bitterness. Instead, she uses it as a teaching tool, showing how strategic thinking in moments of crisis can create opportunities for meaningful change. "When you're treated unjustly," she explains, "your first instinct might be anger. That's natural. But channel that anger into strategic action. Document everything. Know which battles to fight in the moment, and which to fight later. Your dignity is your greatest power." Across town at the police precinct, change manifests in more concrete ways. Captain Brooks stands before his officers as they begin mandatory retraining on bias and procedural justice. His expression is serious. This is not a formality to be endured, but a necessary correction. Officer Daniels and Reynolds sit in the back row, recently returned from suspension. Their faces show the strain of officers who have been forced to confront their own biases. More surprising is Sergeant Miller, now actively engaged in the department's newly formed Community Relations Committee. The night of Eleanor's arrest awakened something in him, the realization that silent discomfort in the face of injustice makes him complicit. "Change ripples outward in ways we can't always predict," Eleanor's voiceover reflects. "Sometimes the person most transformed isn't who you'd expect." On a quiet Sunday afternoon, Eleanor stands before her grandfather's grave. The autumn leaves cascade around her as she places fresh flowers beside his headstone. "My grandfather never lived to see an African-American Attorney General. He never imagined his granddaughter would be both victim of and catalyst for change in the same night. But he understood something essential, that change isn't about dramatic moments of victory. It's about persistent effort, about using whatever power you have, however limited it seems, to push forward. She traces the letters of his name on the stone. William Johnson, civil rights attorney, 1915 to 2005. He taught me that justice isn't a destination we reach, but a path we travel together. Each generation walks a little further, making the way a little clearer for those who follow. How can each of us use our position, whatever it is, to stand up for what's right? The community centre buzzes with activity as Eleanor concludes another workshop. As participants gather their materials, a familiar face appears at the door. Officer Harris in civilian clothes, looking somewhat uncertain. Eleanor approaches her with genuine welcome. "I'm glad you came. I've been thinking about what you said during your release," Harris admits, "about systems that fail people they should protect. I want to help bridge the gap, if I can." As they walk together through the centre, Eleanor introduces Harris to the young people who regard any police presence with understandable wariness. It's an awkward moment, but an important beginning. One young man asks Harris directly, "Why should we trust you when your colleagues treat us like criminals?" It's a fair question. Harris doesn't respond with defensiveness, but with honesty. "Trust is earned. I'm here to start that process." Eleanor watches this exchange with measured hope. This is how real change begins, not with dramatic victories or complete transformations, but with difficult conversations and small steps forward. Justice isn't about happy endings. It's about continuing the work even when the spotlight moves on. The system didn't break overnight, and it won't be fixed in a single moment of triumph. But every time we use our voice, our position, our privilege to push for what's right, we move closer to the world my grandfather imagined, the world I still believe in. As evening falls, Eleanor walks through the community centre doors into the cool night air. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new battles, new opportunities to bend the arc of history toward justice. For tonight, it's enough to know the work continues, and she is still part of it. The path forward remains difficult, but Eleanor Johnson walks it with the dignity her grandfather taught her, head high, purpose clear, determined to use every tool at her disposal to create the change others deserve.